Hey team, this is Grant David Collins and welcome to Basement Philanthropy, a place for people who do not want to wait until they're rich or retired to create meaning, impact, and connection with their money regardless of the amount. On this episode, we're going to be discovering together if we have time for giving and philanthropy in our day-to-day lives, so let's get started. I really enjoy doing experiments in my life when it comes to testing out the assumptions that I see or hear about. And as I've been around the topics of giving and philanthropy, one of the things that has come up over and over again is this assumption that we as a society do not have enough time for giving and philanthropy in our lives. And so in order to test this out, myself and two of my really good friends, Tanner Green and Emily Jensen, got together and tracked every minute of our lives for 5 days in order to answer the question, do we have enough time for giving and philanthropy in our day-to-day lives? On today's episode, we dive into the conversation that we had after we finished this experiment. I think you're really going to enjoy it, so let's dive into it. I am really excited to have both of you on the podcast. Emily is a returning guest, ladies and gentlemen. Tanner is on here for the first time. And so to kind of give the listeners a little bit of a view into kind of your background, because if you're interested in Emily's, I'm going to post in the description below the podcast that we had between her and I so that you can get a little bit of that background. Tanner, why don't you just give us briefly how giving and service philanthropy showed up for you when you were growing up? Like, what has led to somewhat more of a focus recently in philanthropy? Kind of give us some context around that.
Yeah, totally. So I think first of all, my dad is a great example of philanthropy and service and giving. Like, he's just anything, basically what's mine is yours type of guy. And it's so cool. And I always noticed that, I always noticed, especially when I was a kid, that when my friends would come over and there would be Rice Krispie treats, like, hey, take some Rice Krispie treats. I'm like, Dad, those are ours. Like, don't give them. But I started to learn, like what it meant to actually give to people. And in high school, I was still everyone's kind of selfish, Sure. Everyone's their own selfish person. And then I went on a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints to Guatemala and learned just how amazing service can really be. So when I got back, every year in school, when I was at school, I would try and do like one little thing of service just because I knew it would keep me balanced and keep me just kind of focused on what's really important. Yeah. And I haven't done it in the last year or so since I graduated, but I really want to start doing it again. So when I first started, I started at the Food and Care Coalition. Okay, cool. And I would be a server. And I would just go and fill up their waters, take their plates, whatever, at down in Provo. So I did that for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And then for about 2 years after that, I did Meals on Wheels. Oh, cool. So I'd deliver every Tuesday. I would be given a bunch of meals for these specific people. I'd go pick them up at Walgreens, actually, just in the back. So I went to Walgreens, talked to those people, like, hey, I'm here for Meals on Wheels. They gave me these bags. Take them in my car and I'd drive to each individual place and then drop it off. It was just really cool to be able to be there for someone who had no one most of the day, most of the week. Yeah. And it's so hard to jump in, like, because, it takes up time and it's a commitment that you have to go through. So it's like, okay, yeah. All right, let's do it. And then when you jump in, it's like, oh man, that was so worth it. Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you spoke into that factor because that's actually kind of what brings us like all together today to sit down and talk is this conversation about time. Yeah, and true. It's so interesting from my experience. I hear that coming from my lips sometimes, and I'm like knee deep in this stuff. I'm like, oh, I don't know if I have time for that. And what I wanted to start out with, a question I had is, first of all, how was it just tracking time? Like, we don't even have to get into giving, but for you two, what was your experience around just like tracking every minute of your life for 5 days? It was wild, honestly. I thought it was really insightful and really cool. But I think it was you just forget. Like it's tough to be conscious about what you're doing, which is really scary because how much better would you be about going about your day if you were conscious about every decision you were making?
Yeah.
Because so many times I found myself like clocking those, just like, oh yeah, I forgot to clock that. And I was thinking to myself, like, I just made that decision that took 2 hours of my day without even thinking about it and not even be conscious about the repercussions or consequences, positive or negative.
Yeah.
And I just kind of did it. And I was like subconsciously. So that was kind of wild.
Yeah. It's kind of like having, I relate it to almost having a budget for your time.
Yeah.
Like when people get involved with budgeting and finance for the first time, it's like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know that I was spending X amount on this subscription or eating out or whatever that looks like. When you do that with your time, it's almost that same experience.
Yeah. Yeah. True.
Emily, anything?
I also had a really interesting experience tracking because I realized that while I'm tracking my time in these specific categories, it's not actually that black and white. Like I'll sit down, look at my phone while I'm eating or making dinner or something, and it's not like as structured as the data makes it seem.
Yeah.
And that helped me to realize that everything I do has some sort of impact in my life. And while these numbers are a good benchmark, it's not entirely accurate with how I spent my time because there's so much nuance in the way that you spend your time. And so it helped me to focus more in the small moments of like, okay, what am I doing right now? Is this helpful? What end is this moving toward?
Yeah.
And taken to an extreme, obviously that can be like damaging if you overanalyze every single thing you do. But for me this week, it was just really eye-opening to see that there's more time in my day than I think, even though we view time as such a scarce resource.
Yeah.
And I have control over how I spend my time. I'm the one plugging in the numbers, pressing start and stop. Like I choose how to spend my time. It's not happening to me. Nobody is standing over your head saying you have to get exactly 40 hours of work this week or you need to be like exercising for this amount of time. That's something that I elect to do.
Yeah.
Which was really powerful for me to realize.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing is that it gives you a choice. And that's often what is taken away from us. Instagram, TikTok, YouTube is incentivized to not give you a choice, basically, to get you stuck in whatever it is, doom scrolling, and like to keep you there as long as possible. And we, as the consumer, or as people that want to be intentional with our time, can put types of barriers in place so that we can be a little bit more intentional about what we're doing. And I think as we start to dig into kind of the giving side, that's a piece of this, is that when it comes to having time for giving, it really, like, if we back up, having intention, I think that's a key component of this whole discussion. Is like, everybody has time. It's just like, what are you doing with that time? And so for anybody that's interested in kind of doing a similar exercise, I'm going to pop in the description below the app that we use, the different categories that we tracked on our end. And like, if that's something that sounds interesting to you, I would just say like, hey, go for it for a couple of days. You'll probably be really surprised with what happens.
I'd say a full week. A full week. It like, it's doable. It's not that hard. And if you do it for 1 week, you'll really get a lot of insight on what you do, like, and how you spend your time.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. As I sent you the data today, and you all got a chance to kind of comb through your specific data, and then maybe as you started to compare, kind of between the three of us, we did a comparison. Like what stood out to you, or what surprised you about the time that you were spending in the last week?
Something that I realized is that there are a plethora of activities that I could use to fill my time. And if I don't have a set objective with how I'm going to use my time, like, it is no problem to fill the remainder. And so I spent 5.5 hours cooking and eating food last week, which is great. If you know me, you know that's actually not a surprise at all.
Yeah.
But that was in there. There were several hours of distraction. I exercised quite a bit. And so there was a ton of activities, whether beneficial or not, that filled my time if I didn't have something. And so I just went through this and realized, oh my goodness, if I cut out some of these things, cut down on some of these items, then I would have so much more liberty with my time.
Yeah.
And I do have that liberty, but I think it's so easy to just restrict yourself based off of like how you view your day. There's actually more time in the day than you would think.
Yeah, I was really surprised by the daily miscellaneous category. So
Same.
basically what is in this category is we threw like everything that like didn't fall in other categories. So like getting ready for bed or driving in the car somewhere or just like random things.
And how
that you
long
were-
my showers are. Like, so long.
Right. My daily miscellaneous was like 10% of my overall time, which was just like crazy to me that I was spending. And, you know, the way that I kind of set up that category, it sounds like I just was, you know, doing, 10% brushing my teeth and stuff. No, like it was just like all the leftover time. I feel like if it was just like concerted, like brushing teeth, getting ready for bed, it would probably be like 2 hours maybe throughout the week. But we're talking about like, I'm looking at mine right now, 12 and a half hours of who knows what, like who knows what I'm doing in that area.
Seriously.
And that was really, really a big surprise to me as I kind of looked through my stuff on my end.
Yeah, I feel the same way where I'm like, I mean, right now I don't actually have a job, so work is air quotes for me at this point. But I realized how much I didn't work and how much I was spending time doing random miscellaneous things. I'm like, what am I even doing? Like, despite the fact that I'm not working, I could at least be improving something or searching for a job or giving to other people.
Right.
But I just spent time like, I don't know, like it took forever taking showers. Taking showers is so freaking long. Like I had so many times where I was like, wow, I took a 25-minute shower.
Tanner will be posting his water bill in
I know.
the comments.
I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I wasn't in the shower for that long. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So,
and I feel like something that's really important as we start to look at these things is that this conversation is way less about like a judgment call on how people are spending their time and more of a wake-up call around how people are spending their time and how we are spending our time personally. And as I went through this exercise, that is more of what I felt around it. It's like, I like my life. I feel like my life is going relatively well. And there's some things that I definitely want to be a little bit more intentional around. And at the end of the day, that's what this kind of brought out of my experience around it, which is just really, it was nice. I don't think that I would want to track my time every single hour of every day for the next 30 years. But I feel like having it as kind of an exercise that I do on maybe a consistent basis, whether it's like every quarter or every like twice a year, I feel like it's just a really nice space to just kind of reset around what I actually want to create with the time that I have. Everybody's got the same amount of time in the day. What do I want to be doing with that? And that was kind of a big kind of learning that came out of my discussion around it.
And going on with that too, it's interesting that in these categories, we have distractions, we have entertainment, we have social with other people, several activities that sometimes are designed to take you out of real life and to like numb you to what's going on around you.
Yeah.
And it helped me to realize that maybe I would need less of that in my life if I filled my time with other activities that actually give me energy. And so sometimes we just view those distractions as just like, I just need to get away. Like I can't cope with the world around me, with challenges that I'm facing, whatever. I think that those would just naturally kind of fall out of our lives if we were to be more intentional with these areas that actually matter and actually move the needle and give you energy just in and of themselves, so you don't have to go seek it from other places. I think sometimes we just get caught in this hamster wheel of trying to find this rest and settling in our lives that actually we'd be better served if we were to spend our time more intentionally around other people and getting outside of ourselves.
Yeah, it's such a great point, Emily. And I feel like a great transition into us talking about the overarching theme of this project to begin with was like, have this thought process of giving in your mind as you go about this week. And like, let's just see what happens around that. So I'm interested, like, whether it's learning or experiences, when you layered that intention onto this exercise, like what happened? Did anything interesting happen over on that side?
Yeah, I think a big part of it for me was I was looking for, a little bit more aware of opportunities. Like one of the things I had for giving was helping my mom do the dishes, and like I figured like, yeah, this is a giving thing. Like I'm giving to her, so it felt cool to to be more aware of like actually knowing that you are giving to someone. And another one, I picked a friend up at the airport, and I was like, "That's giving too." You know, like that's a lot, and it takes a while to like drive up there and drive back, and we had a good conversation. But I think the biggest thing for being aware of when and where you're giving was interesting to me, because I realized a lot of it was more in the social aspects. When I was doing social things, I would purposefully go and think like, okay, who can I give today? Like, who can I give to today? Who can I serve? What can I do?
Yeah.
And last week was the football national championship game.
Yep.
And so I brought wings over to my friend's house who invited me to come. And I was like, I think this would be a giving thing. Like, this would be something that I can do to help other people, to make them not like feel good, but just something that I can do for someone else. And that feels like a cool experience. That was nice.
That's kind of what I had happen this week. I had just a couple moments where I was in a normal activity and I like transcended that activity to make it something that was more impactful or more intentional, to use that same language. The example I'd share is on Friday, I have a friend that works at the aquarium. And we've been talking about going to this like aquarium, this like backstage aquarium tour. So a couple of us went to the aquarium, and she gave us this like incredible tour where we got to see like the turtles being fed and the manta rays being fed and like all these things like up close, like behind the scenes, like you would never get access to this. And it was just this like really, really cool experience. And we went to lunch after, and I was just like, oh man, like I'm just going to pay for their lunches because like they made this happen for me. And so like it wasn't really that much money really, because it wasn't like a super nice restaurant. But I just noticed that was the thought process that happened. Like we could have just gone and gone to lunch and I didn't have to pay for them. It probably would have been fine. But I'm in the moment. I'm like, wait a second, I can do something different here. And that was something that was really cool, as I had it just on my mind. It just, opportunities just kept on coming up, and I just had the decision. Again, I had the choice on my end to be involved, which was just, it was a cool experience from that perspective.
And I think what you're illustrating, Grant, is just the amount of opportunities that come up when you actually start looking for them. And in your daily life, there are countless opportunities to be able to serve people and to give back. And it happens already in what you're doing. And I realized that and had a couple of experiences like that this week where I was logging a different activity, but thought, hey, I can reach out to this person. So I like reach out to a handful of people, and it was so easy because it already fit into what I was doing. I think sometimes we look at giving and think, I have to go do this massive project. I have to give so many dollars, and really it can just be woven in to our everyday life, and you can create it to be what you want it to. If you want to do something larger later, you can. But it just fits in to your life already.
Yeah, I feel like what's interesting is we talked a little bit about this earlier in the conversation about how budgeting your time is similar to budgeting your finances, and those two things can be involved. And the interesting thing for me as I went through this last week was like, okay, this is me like passively going through the week and thinking about giving. What would happen if I started saying, I'm going to set aside this amount of time every week or every other week to go out and be involved with something that was impactful? Like that's when my mind started to be like, oh, this is really cool. Like outside of just like integrating and weaving it, which is an amazing concept in of itself, what would happen if I took a step back and said, you know what? I think I have 5 hours in daily miscellaneous that I can spend doing something else that is something that I really want to be a part of. And that was another kind of learning that I had as I walked through this, is like, this was really good. This is an awesome week. What would happen if I just actually budgeted time in the same way that I'm budgeting money to be involved with giving? What kind of good could I create in the world if that was happening? Anything else? I just want to make sure that we, as you all just had some time to just sit with this concept, I'll have more of an intentional question in a second around kind of steps forward. But just Anything else that's been on your mind as you were kind of prepping for our conversation today about time and giving and those types of things? Anything that you would want to share, either of you?
Yeah, it was interesting to me to look at the actual data points of how I'm spending my time and realize that I say that I'm committed to certain things in my life. And if I were to track in the future and also look going back, would the data support what I say I'm actually committed to?
Wow.
Or if I were to give this to someone and just say, okay, try to figure out what kind of person Emily is just based off of how she spends her time, like what would that say about me? And
That's a really cool question.
And nothing is as black and white. There's a lot of layered detail here that you just don't see. But if this was all I had to go off of, would this support what I say I'm committed to and who I say that I am?
Yeah.
And so it just made me recommit to the idea of being my word and being who I say that I am and living into who I want to become. Because really, when the rubber hits the road, it looks like this data sheet of how I spend my time, right? And if that's not reflective of me to my core and my character and who I'm striving to become, then maybe that's not accurate. And there's no judgment there, but maybe I can spend some time reevaluating what that looks like for me.
Yeah. Wow. Such a powerful point to just be around. I love that insight, Emily. Tanner, what about you, man?
Yeah, I would say just planning ahead of time is something that I am really looking forward to doing more, and something that I already have done more this week of planning out my day, and not in the way of like, oh, I'm going to do this, and this, but I'm going to set apart massive chunks of time that allow me to just settle and just to get in like the right mindset. Because I felt like my time was not like, I felt like the time and my mindset about what I was doing were not aligned. Like I felt like I was thinking of something else while I was doing something else.
Interesting.
And I felt like they weren't aligned the way I wanted them to be. And I realized that I'm not like a super multitasker. Like it takes a while for me to kick in, because when I would be doing something, let's say working, when I would be working in the morning and then something else would come up and have something else to do, I would still be thinking about work. And so I realized I just need to chunk out more time for those things that are still in my mind. Kind of like what Emily's saying is, align your values and your mindset with your time and how it's going to be spending. Because if you're spending most of your time thinking about something and you're not always doing what you're thinking about, then that's just confliction.
Yeah.
I don't know if confliction is even a word. Is that a word?
Sounds great.
Yeah, whatever.
Used in bananagrams.
But there's a conflict there in your head, and you're like, man, why am I doing this when I should be thinking about this? And a big part of that was like social and entertainment.
Yeah.
I was like, man, should is a bad word because you don't want to shame yourself all the time.
Yeah.
But really, if it aligns with your values and you say, I want to be doing something else right now, then make that switch.
Yeah.
And that's what I've been more intentional about this week.
Yeah. I really like that, Tanner. And what I have experienced in the last probably 8 months is I have been a little bit more intentional with my time in terms of doing this podcast and being around philanthropy and just committing myself to that. What I've realized is that I am just so much more fulfilled in my life. And it doesn't mean that like I look over my list, I'm like, well, my life is perfect and I don't need to do anything else, or I don't really feel a lot of shame around, those things can come up, but really it is so interesting to find out what I'm committed to and then really like drive into that. Man, like my whole life feels different as I've done that. And so,
and also people respect you for it. If you tell them straight up, they're like, hey, come do this. It's like, actually, this is something that's important to me and it aligns with my values. So I'm going to do this for now. And maybe in a little bit, let's hang out or do something afterwards.
Yeah.
But right now, this is important to me. And people are like, yeah, okay. Nobody's gonna be like, dude, that's dumb. At least your friends, right? Your real friends will respect that and they'll be on board and they'll support you.
Yeah.
And sometimes we get in that fear of like, oh man, like I'm letting them down.
Yeah, right.
Or something like that. But it's like, no, first of all, they don't really care that much. And second of all, they want you to succeed. And if
Yeah.
that makes you happy, then that makes them happy.
Yeah. Well, exhibit A in terms of friends caring and doing something, you guys coming and being here in the basement, it's a huge thing. I think the last thing is I usually round off podcasts by asking, like, what would you say to somebody who's on like the sidelines of giving, and just like your what you would tell somebody. And I want to change that question for this podcast to be a little bit more around the subject that we have been talking about today. So how I would love to end off our conversation today is, what would you say to somebody if they said to you that they don't have time to give or to serve?
Yeah, I would definitely say, I would ask them the question. The most important thing is, where do you spend your time?
Yeah.
And if they didn't know, then I would say, then you don't know if you have time or not. Like you have no idea. If I would ask them like, okay, then walk me through your week. Like where don't you have time? Where do you spend your time? Because, if I said the same thing, I would look at this and be like, oh my gosh, of course I have time.
Yeah.
Like I have so much time to do that. So I would kind of like fire back at them a little bit. And then secondly, I would say your giving can also be a mindset. Like if you really are working on something, like let's say, for example, you've been grinding on a business, or you want to be a manager at a restaurant. Like that's a lot of hours. It takes a lot of time, and people get that. And you could also say, but listen, you are a manager at a restaurant. Like your nature of your job is giving.
Yeah.
So if you have the mindset of like, I'm going to be giving extra, I'm going to exceed expectations today at my job within the giving realm, then you are doing a better job than you were yesterday. Like you're getting better every day. So I would say a lot of it, if you probably have time. I would say like, bull crap, like look, download Toggl and track your time, and you will see.
I've got a really cool podcast you should listen to.
Yeah. Like, let me send you this episode real quick. Yeah. And so I would tell them like, okay, really analyze your time first of all, and say, do you really have time, or is it just not a priority?
Yeah.
And then once that is established, and if they say, no, I do want to give, like it is a priority, I would say, first of all, and then once you have that established, then I would say, just put it in your mindset of giving and have that giving mindset, and you will make time.
Yeah.
Time and opportunities will find you.
Yeah. So true. Love that.
Yeah. And I think in any conversation about time with someone, you will quickly discover that you have time to do whatever you'd like to do if you make the time for it. And so after you make that discovery, the next important question is, do you want to? Would you like to be a person who is involved in giving? And if so, what's that going to look like for you? Because I think for most people, we would say that, yeah, I would like to be that kind of person who gives. But if you're not doing it today, then when are you going to do it?
Yeah.
And if you take the way you spend your time and multiply it out by a month, several months, a year, years, what is that going to look like? You will not become that person that you're seeking to become if you don't do it today. Like today is critical. And so, yes, if you peel back those layers and realize you do have time, like what's stopping you from actually living into that and becoming that person who is a giver? Because you in your life, the kind of person you will become is a sum total of all of the moments that you spend. And so if someone is struggling with having time to give, I'd say, well, you don't have time not to give. Because if you don't, then what? Then you're just going to multiply your life out by years and years, and you will never have become that person that you set out to become.
Yeah. Wow. So powerful. If I'm kind of turning the question on myself and thinking about it, something that came to my mind as we were talking about is the word busy. And I understand how often I use that word. Like, yeah, how's your life? Well, it's really busy right now. Like I say that all the time, and I hear that all the time. We use this word almost in the same way as like, how are you doing? Good. Like, it's just like these like filler things that actually don't mean anything, and can, like what Emily is saying, cover up what is actually going on. Like this term of being busy really can just be like a Band-Aid over this kind of festering thing that is happening. We're just like covering it up and hoping nobody sees it, or hoping we don't see it or discover it. And one thing that's been really interesting to me along the good like frame is I've attempted to say like, what could I do? What could I say instead of good? And I kind of want to challenge myself to do the same thing with busy. Like, what would I say instead of, oh, my life is busy? Man, what a powerful moment if I was saying, yeah, you know what? Like, I'm living a really intentional life right now. And if you could express that in a way that wasn't like holier than thou or those types of things. But I just think that, wow, that would be so powerful. It'd be so different than just like the norm of, yeah, I basically what being busy means is like, I literally have no idea and I don't have any control over it. That's what it kind
and
of
that's the vibe
to.
that everyone gets off. Like that's their intention when they say that. They're like, oh, you wouldn't believe I couldn't handle it right now. Like, this is crazy. Like, that's what they always say, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And if we were able to flip that in our minds to say like, yeah, I'm attempting to be intentional with my time, and here's some things that I'm working through or whatever that would look like. I just feel like, man, that could be a change just on my end to think about, because sometimes the question is more important than even the answer. So this has just been amazing. Thank you two, for joining me and for putting so much time aside last week to be involved with this. It means a ton to me. Well, team, that's it for me. Let's go out in the world and create good with the money in our pockets and the time in our schedules together. Talk soon.